The art style to School Days is actually pretty sharp. You can tell that they put a lot of time and effort into the artwork for this anime. It was made in late 2007, and compared to the anime made in the last 5 years, it was done nicely. I would compare it to a very modern-looking Haruhi Suzumiya, trading some of the chibiness from Haruhi for a slightly more serious look, appropriate for the show's difference in atmosphere. The voice acting is pretty average. Not that any of it was necessarily bad, per se, but the performances either don't stand out enough to grab your attention, or are otherwise pretty forgettable. Like most anime, it opens with an uplifting J-pop track, and then closes with a mild downbeat track. Neither one will stick with you for very long. Most of the in-show music is pretty upbeat too, but if you get into the anime enough to pay attention to the dialogue, you probably won't even notice it's there. Overall, it's not terrible sound choices, just not memorable ones either. Okay, so the way I see it, the main cast is made up of 3 characters. The first and main protagonist is Ito Makoto. He's a pretty generic teenage anime character struck by love. You know, the I'm socially awkward, but you generally love me for it type. However, his character, in my opinion, suffers from a pretty disgustingly inconsistent decision-making process later, and overall had me tearing my hair out by the time the anime was over. You'll notice that I said "in my opinion" earlier, and that's because there's a lot of speculation as to how this character distortion began, but I personally see no reason for his character to act the way it does. The next character and main love interest is Katsura Kotonoha. She's a shy girl with no relationship experience at all, but she falls for our lovable goofy Ito, and thus her main character status is earned. Her character actually goes through my favorite developments, as you really get the most interesting parts of the show from watching her. She's not my favorite character, but she is the one that stands out when you think back on the show and what you saw of it. Our last main character is Saionji Sakai. She's the main bridge between Makoto and Kotonoha, and acts as our protagonist's best friend. She's probably my favorite of the main characters, and is easily the most relatable character on the show. She's not flashy, and she doesn't really do anything too spectacular or out there, but she is the most level-headed and understandable character on the show. And while Makoto and Konoha go through their strange twists and turns as far as character development go, Sakai's development is really the only one of the 3 that stays realistic and believable to follow through the remainder of the show. The side characters are pretty below standard, in my opinion. The problem is, nobody from the group is really interesting to watch, except for maybe a couple of exceptions. And of course, as with almost all slice-of-life anime, the main character has this god-awful piece of crap make me want to rip my ears and eyes out of mercy comedy relief side character. His voice is grating, his actions are non-existent unless the show needs a break from being serious for a second, and he's overall unnecessary. And I can't even say that he's unnecessary, because the worst part of it all is they tried to shoehorn him into the story with this really awkward transition that happens later in the series. It's like they really wanted to make him a main character for just a second, just long enough for it to be necessary that he's there, but they make the rest of his existence there absolutely painful just to watch. It's high school in Japan. I'm sorry to keep this section so short, but I really can't think of what else to say about it. It's just modern day high school life in Japan. It's a pretty high school? I don't know. So, the story in School Days really is the show's worst quality, in my opinion. It starts off pretty promising. A relationship that turns into a love triangle. At this point, it's super entertaining and enjoyable to watch, but it takes a turn for the worst. And then another. And then another, and then another, and then another, and then another. What you're left with is this painfully skewed plot that I can't nor do I want to follow. Again, there is a lot of speculation as to why the plot ends up this way, and the one thing this anime does that's really interesting is it kind of leaves a lot of questions for the fans to answer themselves, and to talk with other fans about. The other edge to that sword, however, is that leaving the plot in this state also makes the show come off as incoherent and childish, forcing me to fill the plot holes in by myself makes me not want to, especially when there's so many and the plot holes are so big. You may enjoy watching something like this, where the plot takes a lot of turns and instead of the anime explaining the story to you, you being left with making the explanations up yourself as you go along, and more power to you. But I don't. So overall, maybe it's good, but just not my cup of tea. The tone is light and romantic at first, but quickly snaps to being more tense and dramatic at a certain point in the series. Had the story been done correctly, this would have kept me very interested and been a rather exciting thing to watch. But it has to force the tone switch to keep you interested rather than it being a natural thing that you would feel from watching the events unfold, and that's just not okay with me. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the series as a whole. Overall, I've tried my best to keep my anger in, and my opinions toned down a bit on this anime, but it's honestly one of the worst anime that I've ever watched. I really, truly can't stand this anime, and can think of very few anime that compare to how badly I think of this one. I, of course, as bad as I think it is, I encourage everybody to try it themselves before judging it, but my opinion is that it's a waste of time to watch, especially with so much better anime out there to be watching. And do you know what the worst part is? It set me up for such an enjoyable experience. I really wanted to like this anime in every step of the way. After the first few steps, it just would not let me enjoy myself. It's like, okay, so someone's baking you a cake, and you see all of the ingredients, and it makes you super excited for the cake. But for seemingly no reason, they throw in hot peppers and pickles and olives and tomato sauce and just all kinds of crap that you don't want in a cake. And when it's done, it's just not appealing anymore. Yes, it's a very interesting cake, and it might even look kind of pretty, but that doesn't mean I'm going to enjoy eating the darn thing because it's a disgusting mess. In other words, the cake is never mind. My recommendation is to skip this anime. It promises you joy and leaves you with pain.